Okay, we are going to wrap up chapter 12 this morning, Lord willing. We only have a couple of verses to go, and before we start in chapter 13, since there's some heavy doctrine coming out of the first part of chapter 13, I don't want to get into that this week because I don't want to cut it in half. I'd rather deal with that at one time. But we will be wrapping up chapter 12 this morning. We've got this one section left. Now, the first section, if you remember, dealt primarily with people, how we deal with people in the church, how we deal with believers. We finished that section last week. Now, this still applies to people in the church if people in the church act like unbelievers. But it's primarily, how do we get along with the unbelievers in this world? How do we treat just the folks in the world? How do we get through that? And there's some interesting information in here that I think once we get to the end of it, you'll be able to breathe a huge sigh of relief, and you'll understand how to better deal in some situations. Now, Paul makes it sound like it's very simple to do this. I will tell you that it is not. It's simple instruction, but since we live in a fallen flesh nature, it is incredibly hard to bring about what it is that Paul is telling us to do here. So don't expect this to be the easiest thing you've ever done in your life. It's not gonna be. It really is. It's gonna be hard. But if you do it, you get blessed by God and you get through this life a little bit easier. Okay? Now let's read the verses first, verses 17 through 21, and then we'll start to break them down. Verse 17, recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Now that sounds like fairly simple instruction. But as we start to look into this, and when you start to look into your own nature, and you look into some of the, anytime somebody comes along and does something to affront you, what's the first thing you think? I'm going to get even with that guy. Well, you just violated exactly what Paul said. Because now you're going to go render evil for evil, and that's exactly what he told you not to do. So you see, your nature is just going to obviously go in the opposite direction of this. But if you can practice this, when somebody does you wrong and you can do what Paul says, you'll be blessed by God for doing it. And the results may end up being, you might end up winning a friend rather than having an enemy. You just don't know, okay? So these are instructions on how to get along in this world dealing with unbelievers, okay? Now there are two concepts in verse 17. The first, don't swap evil for evil. Do not pay someone back with evil because they gave you evil. Somebody stabs you in the back, don't turn around and stab them harder. Don't do like they do, okay? Do not recompense evil for evil. Now, in verse 19, we have part of the reason why. We're not going to deal with verse 19 right now, but let's read it quickly. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Now we're going to get to that when we get to verse 19. But I want you to understand what vengeance is. Vengeance is defined as the infliction of pain on another in return for an injury or offense. Okay? Such infliction, when it proceeds from malice or mere resentment and is not necessary for the purposes of justice, is revenge and a most heinous crime. When such infliction proceeds from a mere love of justice and the necessity of punishing offenders for the support of the laws, it is vengeance and is warrantable and just. God is the only one that can provide vengeance based on His law being broken and be just. If we try to do it, it ends up being revenge. Now, we have instructions in the Bible in some cases where we exclude someone, but we're not inflicting physical pain on them, and that's what we're talking about here, okay? I want you to turn over to Matthew chapter 5. Very famous passage. This is in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, we're going to begin reading at verse 38. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, that ye resist not evil. I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. Now, to smite someone on the cheek, that's to slap them with an open palm. Okay, that's what that means. So if somebody gets upset and slaps you, either literally, physically, or metaphorically, the instruction here, and it's not that big of a deal. I mean, a slap across the face, it could sting for a couple of minutes, but you're not going to have to go to the hospital over it. It's not going to take your life if someone ordinarily, I mean, unless you're getting ready to keel over anyway, a slap on the face is not that big of a thing, right? It's not that injurious for someone to slap you in the face. So a couple of things I want you to see. If it's not that big of a thing, turn the other cheek and let it go. Okay? Those are the instructions of Christ. Now, the important thing to remember, though, is that we're dealing with something that's not that big of a deal. If it's a big deal, that's a whole different situation. You have to be looking at this verse thinking that if he slaps me on the cheek, I have another cheek to turn to him. If he's going to slap me on the cheek with an axe and take my head off, I'm not going to be able to turn the other cheek. Therefore, that doesn't apply. This applies in the cases where it's something that's just not that great of a thing. It's not that big of a deal. In those cases, turn the other cheek. Let it go. It's not, you know, here's your option. You let it go, and you know what usually happens? A lot of times what happens, somebody hauls off, gets mad, and either physically or metaphorically slaps you, and you don't respond. You know what happens? That person starts to feel ashamed of themselves. It doesn't take too long until they start thinking, man, I shouldn't have done that. I was kind of out of line. If you just stand there and take it. You have an opportunity to deal with someone, but you haul off and punch him back, and the fight's on, and it ain't going to end until it ends, and everybody's bloody, and there's no way to resolve this thing. And you all know it, and we all fail at it constantly. This is not that easy to do. Any of you that are married know this is not that easy to do. When your spouse does something that irks you, and the next thing you know, you're screaming at each other. Don't. When the slap comes, let it go. Just let it go. Turn the other cheek. Now, if they haul off and hit you on the other cheek, well, there's no instruction past that. So I would say go ahead and beat the soup out of them in that case. But the first time, now that's just me, okay? I don't have that written in here, but it doesn't say what to do after they slap you the second time. So you're on your own on that one. Now, if somebody breaks into your house late at night and they're armed and they intend to do you harm, you're not going to be able to turn the other cheek. So my suggestion there is that you start shooting them before they can shoot you, and you shoot them a lot and you reload and empty it out again. Luckily, we live in Florida, and you can get in California they'd throw you in jail, but here in Florida we have a castle law. You can do that. So if it's a big deal and you can't turn the other cheek, well, you have the right to defend yourself. But if it's a minor thing, just keep your cool. Now, I know that's hard to do, especially for some of us that are passionate about things, but it's a lesson that we need to learn. So recompense no man evil for evil. And look at this. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And verse 15. See that none render evil for evil unto any man, but ever follow that which is good, both among yourselves and to all men. So, somebody does you evil, don't do them evil back. Don't think, oh, I'll get even with that guy. You've heard the old line, I don't get mad, but I always get even. Yeah, you're going to end up doing evil for evil if you do that. You're going to pay them back, and understand something. As we get a little bit farther in here, you're going to see something about born-again people. There is something within the born-again soul that those that are not born again do not have. You will run into people, folks, that they intend to get you upset. You ever watch a football game? It's amazing to me how it is that the refs don't understand this. You would think that they would understand this. It's the same thing in hockey. You get one of these guys that starts taunting somebody else, and they taunt them, and they taunt them, and they call them names across the line, and they insult their heritage, and they insult their mother, and until finally the guy's had enough and hauls off and cold cocks the guy across the line. Now, and the guy that swung, he's the one that gets kicked out of the game. This is the way the world works. They do this in real life. This is what people do. And they expect you to finally lose it and punch them in the face. That's what they want. Because then they can point at you and say, see this guy over here? That's what they're looking for. Don't give it to them. Just don't give it to them. It'll drive them nuts. And maybe the ref will finally see that they're the ones doing the taunting. It's worth a shot. So don't render evil for evil. Now the next part of this is provide things honest in the sight of all men. In the sight of all men. This is something that is open. This is something that is seen. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And verse 21. Providing for honest things not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. Look at Romans chapter 14 and verse 16. Romans 14:16. Let not then your good be evil spoken of. Well, how do you keep your good being evil spoken of? People see that what you're doing is good, and it's kind of hard for them to talk about it in an evil sense if it's open. Look at 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12. Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. Now, what does that mean? 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. I believe we just looked at this. Same chapter, different verse. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 22 says, abstain from all appearance of evil. Don't just abstain from the evil, abstain from the appearance of evil. Don't do things that are going to make people think that what you're doing is evil. Okay? There could be a strip club somewhere that has the greatest grilled cheese sandwich that has ever been made on planet Earth, and I love grilled cheese sandwiches. But if I go into that strip club to have a grilled cheese sandwich and a glass of milk, people that see me go in there are not going to say, you know, I'll bet he's going in there to have a grilled cheese sandwich and a glass of milk. Right? That just looks bad. So avoid things that look bad. The other side of this, we're to try to learn, if we think about the first part of the verse, recompense no man evil for evil. We should try to learn how to avoid all deceitfulness, to avoid all two-facedness, and to appear too worldly. Okay? Now that's kind of a given when it comes to Christianity. Those are things you shouldn't be doing, right? But think about this. Christians should look like what they claim to be. Their manner of life, their actions, their dress, their decorum, their manner of speech should always be above board, should always look Christian. Right? You want to look like, act like, dress like, behave like who you really are. And if you are a Christian, then that means you look like and act like and dress like and behave like a Christian all the time. Not just when you're in church. But when you're around the people in the world, you act the same way that you would sitting in this room on a Sunday morning. That's providing things honest in the sight of all men. If you are in fact a Christian, those people ought to be able to spot that there's something different here. Now, I'm not saying you have to wear any stupid uniform, but you should, I mean, this is not the time to where you come to church, where a woman comes to church in a dress and then goes to the beach in a string bikini, showing off everything that they got. Okay? You can tell where to draw the line. But if you're Christian, then be Christian. And don't take it to the point, I mean, I know that there are some religions where they go completely the opposite. Look at the Amish or some of these Mennonites, where they wear their holy clothes around to show off how holy they are, but they don't live that way, they just look that way. Roman Catholic priests have the little collar so that you know that they've got a little collar. And you know what else? They write those little collars off their taxes, because you can do that if it's one of those things. That's why most of those guys wear that. It's tax deductible. Where, yeah, I can't write off my suit, because you can wear a suit anywhere. But if it's one of those things, oh yeah, that comes right off the top of the 1040. And that's why you should be no different around worldly people than you are around people in the church. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. Be the same person. This also would include certain business practices that are legal and they're done by tons of people, but they're really not honest in the sight of all men, and they're not the types of things that Christians should be involved in. Now, I don't know, we have some loan officers in the room. I don't know if they still do this or not. When I found out about this, I just about lost my mind, because I didn't know that this was going on. I was never a loan officer, so how would I know what was going on in the build-up to the 2008 thing? But when I found out that if I were a loan officer and you could qualify for an interest rate of 4%, but I could convince you to take the 5% loan, that I got a huge kickback off of that, and that there were loan officers making more money off of the kickback by lying to the people and telling them you can only qualify for 5% instead of 4%, than they were off of the commission they were making. That is not providing things honest in the sight of all men. And we got loan officers in the room. I find out you're doing that, that's an excludable offense. Just so you know. That is not providing things honest in the sight of all men. If the guy can qualify for 3%, then by God he gets 3%. You don't charge him 6 and take the other 3 and stick it in your pocket. Now, that's legal, or it was legal, and businesses do it all the time, but it's not according to God's law, as we're going to see a little bit later on as we move forward in this. Let me give you another one. When I sat on the board of the Appraisal Institute. The Appraisal Institute has different levels of membership, and they recognize that as people start to get older, they don't work as much as they would. They may not fully retire, but they might kind of retire and pull back some. So they came up with a rule that, or a category of membership called semi-retired. You could take semi-retired status once you reach 60 years old, assuming a bunch of other things. But one of the requirements in that is that you can only make $25,000 a year as a real estate appraiser. If you're going to take that status, well, then that means that you're starting to pare down your business. You're not working full-time. We did an audit on this. I cannot tell you the number of people that turned 60 years old, took their semi-retired status, and were still knocking down 6 figures a year, lying to the Appraisal Institute for this loophole. That is not providing things honest in the sight of all men. The world might do it and might think it's fine. Don't you dare do it in here. That's not what God's telling you. You provide things honest in the sight of all men. You know what? There are things that are legal in this country. Prostitution is legal in some counties in the state of Nevada. Well, it's legal, so does that mean that I can go to a brothel because it's legal? Of course not. Killing babies in this, we kill 650,000 innocent babies a year here because they got a doctor doing the deed, and that's legal in this country. Is that Christian? No. So don't look at the law of man to make your decision whether or not it's proper. Look at the law of God and provide things honest in the sight of all men, and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 21. Providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. We'd already looked at that verse. Now, you know, I told you when we started, once we finished chapter 11, I told you we were going to get into the practical godliness kind of stuff, right? And And I'm afraid some of you might have thought, oh, well, that's better than crawling through this doctrine. The problem with practical godliness is sometimes it stings. Doctrine doesn't sting as bad as this stuff does. Doctrine doesn't prick at your heart the way some of this stuff does. So if you're guilty of any of this in the past, then apologize for it and just don't do it again. It's that simple. Because what's in the past is in the past. But just understand that this is how God expects us to live. He wants us to look like what it is that we profess to be. How else are you ever going to have anybody ask you, what's the reason for the hope within you? If you don't look any different than anybody else. You go to church and you look like a Christian, and then the rest of the week, they can't tell the difference from you and anybody else. Okay? Okay, now let's get down to some fun stuff. Verse 18. If it be possible, I started jumping up and down for joy the first time I heard this explained. Sometimes it ain't possible, folks. Sometimes it just isn't possible. But when it is, if it be possible, okay? That's caveat number one. It has to be possible. There are some people that this just does not apply to because it's not possible to live peacefully with those folks. And some of you have probably run into them. And it doesn't matter what you do, it just ain't gonna work. It's not possible. But if it be possible, okay, caveat number one. Caveat number two, as much as lieth in you. As much as lieth in you. Live peaceably with all men. You are to go as far as you can possibly go. Stretch out as far as you can stretch. But there's going to be a breaking point. Hopefully you won't hit the breaking point. But if you do, you just make sure that you reached as far as you could. You went as far as you could possibly go with this guy before you just couldn't take it anymore. If it's possible, as much as lieth in you. Now, the ability to live in peace is not a natural born ability. The world doesn't have it. Born again people have it. The world doesn't. If the world had the ability to live in peace, then why are we constantly at war? Why are we always involved in one fight or another? Why are people always attacking someone physically or verbally? Why is that? Why can't the people in Washington, D.C. get along? Why can't they live in peace for the betterment of the country? Because they don't have the ability to live in peace. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. Look at Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. If you have the ability to live in peace, that's an evidence that you are born again. Born again people can live in peace. But that's a fruit of the Spirit. And that comes in the new birth. Now we all have differing gifts. You remember back in verse 6 of chapter 12, it said, having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of the faith. We all have different gifts. And we all have different amounts of different gifts. Some people are just more peaceful than others. Some don't have a whole lot of that. And so they've got a shorter fuse than some other folks have. Some people have a very long fuse. They can take more. Now, what we should do is try to practice what we got and work with what we've got and exercise what we've got, so that those of us that have a short fuse eventually can get a little bit longer fuse. And maybe someday we'll get a long fuse, and those that already have a long fuse, they got something else they should be working on. If you've already got this one nailed, then go work on one of the others. But if this is a problem, then work on this one, okay? And so the instruction at this point, what Paul is saying is that if it's possible, as much as lieth in you, as much live peaceably with all men, okay? Look at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9. This is in the Beatitudes, where Christ said, "Blessed are." Now notice, this isn't something that you get blessed for. This is a description of certain people. "Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." That's the ad. If you're born again, you have some of that in you. Work on it. Stretch it out. Let it go farther. Make more of it. Look at James chapter 3. James chapter 3, beginning at verse 13. "Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his work with meekness of wisdom. But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. The wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace." So you see the difference. Those that envy, those that are full of strife, those that don't live peacefully, that doesn't come from above. That's inherent in your nature. That's inside of the flesh that hasn't gotten changed yet. So we're being told, don't follow that. Follow the Spirit on this. And if you can lay some of this stuff aside, when you're in one of these situations, and trust me, I know it's not easy. Trust me. I can't tell you the number of times I've just wanted to go haul off and cold cock somebody. Just don't. And as much as you can, live peaceably with all men. Now there's a reason, and we're going to get to it in just a minute. Okay? When we get to verse 19, we're going to see we're going to see why. First, look at 1 Peter chapter 3. Verses 10 through 12. "For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good. Let him seek peace and ensue it. For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers, but the face of the Lord is against them that do evil." Remember, God's watching. God's watching. So as much as you can. If it's possible, live peacefully. And just, in some cases, just somebody does you wrong, let it go. Just let it go. Now, I know this sounds easy, doesn't it? Just wait until this afternoon when it happens, and then you go, oops, wasn't all that easy. But just work on it. Practice it. Eventually, hopefully, you get better at it to the point to where you can recognize that really wasn't that. You know, some of the biggest arguments that my wife and I have ever had have been over some of the most silly little things that don't really amount to anything at all when you stop and think about it. When you look at it completely out of context, you go, why was that even a discussion? Why did that even come up? And most of you, I'm assuming, are likewise. That some of the arguments you get into, after it's over with, you think, that was really silly. Why did we even do this? Well, because of this flesh you're stuck with. So the instruction is, let it go. It's not that big of a deal, and God will take care of it. So, which is where we get into verse 19. Okay? Verse 19, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Look at Leviticus chapter 19. Right after Exodus. Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now we're going to get into this when we get into chapter 13 heavily. Okay, but this point, don't avenge yourself. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 32, which is where Paul's actually quoting from over in Romans. Deuteronomy 32. And verse 35. This is God speaking. To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them shall make haste. For the Lord shall judge his people and repent himself for his servants. Understand that the time will, you know, one of the things we tend to think that God's just not, he's just not responding as quick as he ought to. He's just not getting around to taking care of these evil folk the way that we would want it taken care of. He's just not moving quick enough. And then you start wondering whether or not he's even paying attention to it. Well, he is. He's paying attention to it. Look at Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 30. Where we have the same idea again. Hebrews 10:30. For we know him that hath said, vengeance belongeth unto me, I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Now, while it might appear at times that God's not extracting vengeance upon our enemies like we really wish he would do, there's something you need to understand. Now remember, we're talking about unbelievers here, right? We're talking about how we deal with unbelievers outside of the church, people that are probably not going to be in heaven with you, okay? He gives them partial punishment in this life and full and complete punishment in the next. And he has a place, it's all set up for that, known as the lake of fire. So he may not extract the vengeance that you would want him to extract today, but at the end, trust me, all the debts will be paid. They get partial punishment in this life. They get full and complete punishment in the next. So don't take your own vengeance on them. Let God deal with it. He will. He's paying attention. This is just like we receive partial blessing in this life, and we receive full and complete blessing in the next, in heaven. That's where we really get all the blessing. We get some here as a taste of what we'll have there. But this ain't heaven, folks. Sitting in this room with the church people is about as close as we're going to get on this planet. We go home this afternoon, it ain't going to be heaven again. We only get partial here, complete there. And the wicked get partial here and complete there. Okay? So we just need to remember that. Look at, turn to Psalm chapter 73. This is a psalm that was written by a fellow by the name of Asaph. And he struggled with the same idea. This idea that it seems like these wicked people just seem to get away with everything. There's no punishment for them. They just get away with it. And here I'm trying to do as good as I can do, and I just keep getting stepped on over and over. Why is that? That's what he was dealing with in this psalm. Where am I here? Yeah. Psalm chapter 73. Truly God is good to Israel, even to such as are a clean heart. But as for me, my feet were almost gone, my steps had well nigh slipped. For I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Why is it that some of these wicked people seem to prosper? Why is that? For there are no bands in their death, but their strength is firm. When they die, they're just as happy as anybody else. They're not afraid of anything. They go through life. They have plenty of money. They never have a care in the world. When they go to their grave, they're just got a smile on their face. Just as why? Why is that? They are not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. Why? Because they don't have a conscience pounding on them all the time. Those types of things don't bother them at all. They can go just turn the screws to somebody and laugh about it, and then they don't have a conscience that comes along and says, you know, you probably shouldn't have done that. They don't deal with that. They seem to be happy. Therefore pride compasseth them about as a chain, violence covereth them as a garment. Their eyes stand out with fatness. They have more than heart could wish. They are corrupt and speak wickedly concerning oppression. They speak loftily. They set their mouth against the heavens, and their tongue walketh through the earth. Therefore his people return hither, and the waters of a full cup are wrung out to them. And they say, how doth God know? And there's no knowledge in the Most High. They look at this book and they look at people like us and they think we're idiots, because they're living a life that they don't have a care in the world. Everything they do prospers. They don't get sick. They just sail through. Why? Why is it that the wicked, in some cases, sail through life like this and don't ever seem to get punished? Behold, these are the ungodly who prosper in the world. They increase in riches. Now look at the other side of this coin. Verily, I have cleansed my heart in vain and washed my hands in innocency. For all the day long have I been plagued and chastened every morning. If I say I will speak thus, behold, I should offend against the generation of thy children. When I thought to know this, it was too painful for me until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then understood I their end. You see, what Asaph is dealing with, he's looking at this fact that these people seem to be living wicked lives, but they prosper, they're happy, they're healthy, they've got more than their heart could ever want, until he finally went to God's house and realized God's watching and he's going to repay someday. And it'll all be settled in the end. Surely thou didst set them in slippery places. Thou castest them down into destruction. How are they brought into desolation, as in a moment they are utterly consumed with terrors. I mean, think about that. You live your whole life, everything's wonderful, you die, and instantly you're in a place you don't want to be, consumed with terrors. No one wants that. As a dream when one awaketh, so, O Lord, when thou awakest, thou shalt despise their image. Thus my heart was grieved, and I was pricked in my reins. So foolish was I and ignorant. I was as a beast before thee. Nevertheless, I am continually with thee. Thou hast holden me by my right hand. Thou shalt guide me with thy counsel, and afterward receive me to glory. You see, on the one hand, these people that tend to prosper, the wicked, they've got hell on the other side of this. As Elder Gerald used to say, this is the only heaven they're ever going to know. For those people, this is the only heaven that they will ever know. And God, in some cases, has been so gracious to them and has allowed them to have such wealth. And yet, are they thankful? No. Now, does that not prove the doctrine of total depravity? The fact that even those that are blessed with riches and honor still don't look to God and say thanks? Even in all that, they still, and yet those that seek God, the ones that God has put his hand on, the ones that he's watching and protecting, his children, sometimes we don't live the luxurious life that they do. Most of the time we don't. Most of the time we struggle to pay the rent at the end of the month. And yet these other people, they don't have those issues. They don't have those problems. They don't get chastened all the time. They don't slip up and the next thing you know, God's got his belt out and is whipping them on their hiney. They don't deal with that, but we sure as heck do. I trip one time and the next thing you know, I'm held up for another week with a bad knee. We get chastened constantly. Why? Well, because like I said, they get partial punishment in this life and full and complete punishment in the next. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 8. Always go too far on there. There you were. Such a small book. Ecclesiastes 5, right after Proverbs. And verse 8. If thou seest the oppression of the poor and violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter. For he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. The score's all going to be settled in eternity. God's watching, even though sometimes it doesn't seem that he is. So we're told not to avenge ourselves. We're also told over in Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 11, it says, the discretion of a man deferreth his anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression. There's the verse for the comment that I've been making quite a bit this morning. If you can let it go, let it go. Just let it go. If it's not that big of a deal, let it go. And that applies, you know what, that applies in your church life as well. You know, if somebody does something, I can't tell you the number of times that people have hurt my feelings or offended me or whatever. It happens, I've got kind of a thin skin. It happens a lot with me. It's happened a lot with me over the years. But if it was never big enough of an issue to follow Matthew 18 and have the guy thrown out of the church over, then let it go. Just let it go. Because you know what? For every time that I've been offended by someone, I've probably offended people a dozen times for every time I've gotten it. And it's probably the same with you. We are people. We are humans. We do stupid stuff a lot of the time. Sometimes it's best just to understand that, you know what? Let it go. Just let it go. Okay, verse 20. This is a fun one. This is how you can get even. I hope I have time to finish this. This is how you get even with folks. God gives you permission. He gives you permission to go get a galvanized bucket and take charcoal briquettes, right? And fill that bucket up with charcoal briquettes. Put lighter fluid all over it, light the match, and let them cook until they're red hot. Okay? Absolutely, and then put on some asbestos gloves because you can't touch this pan anymore. And then walk over to this guy that done you wrong and flip that on top of his head. God gives you permission to do that. Would that make you feel good when one of these guys just grinds you into the ground? Here's your way of getting even. You are permitted to do this to get even, and it will have the result of pouring those coals right on top of their head. All right? So far so good? Let's read the verse. Verse 20, therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. You get one of these guys that just wants to make your life an absolute living hellhole, do good to him. Do good to him. And it's the same. You get one of these troublesome pests that just despises you and wants to use you, do good to him. It'll drive him nuts. And God will reward you for it. God will bless you for doing it. Look over at Proverbs chapter 25. This is where Paul is getting this from. Proverbs chapter 25, verses 21 through 22. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. That's how you can do it. God lets you do that. He doesn't want you to use your vengeance on him, but he will let you do that. Just do good. Help them with their needs. Your enemy needs help. They got a flat tire. Go help them change the tire. Be good to them. And seriously, it'll drive them nuts. They go out of their way to try to get you, and then you turn around and be nice to them. Well, two things will happen. Number one, we're back to the occasion where they start to feel sorry start to feel ashamed of what it was that they did to you, or they'll just avoid you. But you usually don't have to worry about it. But see, we're back to the evil for evil. They do something to you and you decide to get even with them and do something. Now you got God against you because he told you not to do it. And now you're in a fight. And you're never going to get out of that fight. It just isn't going to happen. So this is some of the best instruction that I can give you. I wish I could teach it better, but I think the Bible does a pretty good job of explaining it all by itself. You don't need me to get into a lot. And then we come to our final verse this morning, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. John Gill said it this way: overcome the evil man and the evil he has done to you by doing good to him, by feeding him when hungry, by giving him drink when thirsty, by clothing him when naked, and by doing other offices of kindness and humanity to him, which is most likely to win upon him, and of an enemy to make him your friend. And if not, however, it will show that you are conquerors, yea, more than conquerors, through the grace and strength of him that has loved you, over Satan, over the corruptions of your own hearts, and over the malice and wickedness of your enemies. Be not overcome with evil, overcome evil with good. And with that, I thank you for your very kind and patient attention this morning. Let's stand and be dismissed in prayer.